My name is Sarah Garza. I'm a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher in Northern California. And today I'm going to talk to you about ways that you can use the book Abigail and John in your classrooms. Keep in mind, this is a book that also can be used by parents who are homeschooling or parents who just want to supplement their children's education outside of the classroom. So today we'll be talking about ways that you can use this text in your reading activities, your social studies activities. We'll talk about some art activities you can use this book with, and also STEAM. So I think it's going to be really great in showing you different ways that you can use this resource in lots of different places in your classroom or at home. I will say there are going to be some activity sheets and assessments that are mentioned today, and you have access to all of those. So if you go to the website www.grateful.americanbookseries.com, you'll be able to download those resources and also find some other supplemental materials that will help you really bring this story to life. I think next we should kind of briefly go over like a quick summary of the book so you understand what you're getting when you read a book like this with your classroom. The book is titled Abigail and John, and I think it's really interesting. You really get to kind of see history play out kind of like through the relationship of these two people and kind of the ways in which their partnership helped form the nation that we have today. I think sometimes we forget the impacts that a single individual can have, or in this case, two individuals together. And as the story progresses, we kind of get to experience different historical events. We get to see the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, the American Revolution, Continental Congresses, all through the eyes of these two individuals who got to experience it and live it firsthand. The other thing that I think is really great about this book is it pulls in lots of other historical figures that you'll likely be teaching about in your classroom. So Benjamin Franklin makes an appearance here. Thomas Jefferson, of course, makes an appearance here. Even our first president, George Washington, makes an appearance here. So like talking about the historical events, talking about the people, it just is a really great resource. Of course, it's the biography of this couple and their really kind of supportive, loving partnership, but also within the context of American history. So it's really great. It's like you have the story of Abigail and John, and then woven throughout their story are all of these really exciting historical events and really interesting historical figures. So it's kind of a great way to kind of combine both and to do both. It really does focus on the partnership, kind of how Abigail and John are able to influence one another throughout these times, support one another throughout these times. And it's a really like humanizing dual biography, which I think is kind of cool. And it really does set it apart. You know, it's not just a biography of John Adams and Abigail Adams is in the sidebar. It's not just a biography of Abigail Adams and John Adams is in the sidebar. We're kind of following these two stories as they come together and then move forward together as a couple and what that looks like and what impact that has on the founding of our nation. Another thing that makes it really unique is this really like charming, beautiful art designed by Clarice Smith solely for this book. So I don't know what grade levels everyone's teaching out there, but I know that even in middle school, I have many students who are aspiring artists. And so I really think the artwork here is just so beautiful and such a great inspiration, you know, kind of engage kids through the art as well as the story. So for reading activities that you can use with this book, I think one of the most powerful things you can do is close reading, meaning that you're reading the text multiple times and you're really kind of going through each time and carefully identifying or carefully monitoring your understanding as a student. So as you read, you know, you can ask questions about the text. You can point out things that are interesting to you. You can mark places where you want further clarification. So there's really a lot of agency you have as a student in a close reading to really dig into the text. And I can say this is a really high quality text for rigorous reading. I think it would be really excellent text for the multiple reads, because the way that it's written, it's not really making it too simplistic for the reader. Of course, the students will be able to gather some meaning, but there is more you can discover the more times you read. So one way you might kind of do this close reading in the class, keep in mind, I'm giving you some suggestions here, but of course, you have to kind of adapt it to what you know will work best for your students. So the first read through, you can have the students do individually. You can have the students read the book as a small group. You can have do like a class read where you read to the class. I think that's depending on, what's most engaging for your class or what they might respond to the best. But then for the second reading, it's really where the close reading comes in. That's really where we're going to be like digging into the text. So you can have students do this with sticky notes, and so they can write right onto the textbook. So I would say, and you know what I do too to save sticky notes, because those things get expensive, is sometimes I'll take the sticky notes and just cut them into strips, because really I just kind of need them to be markers that stand out. I don't always need the entire sticky note. So you can kind of decide how that will work for you and your resources in your classroom. But I might have the students write a little question mark on a strip of sticky note for an area where, as a student, I'm having trouble understanding. Either I don't understand the vocabulary, I'm not sure what the story is trying to tell me. It might also be a place where you have a question where you want to know more. You're like, okay, I understand that this happened, and your thoughts are taking you as a student off to the next place. I have more questions about the Boston Massacre. I have more questions about the, Continental Congress. I understand what John Adams's role was here, but what about this and what about this? And, my students love what if questions. So really kind of getting in there and understanding, like, what do I not get and what do I want to know more? And the little question mark will be that. And that's something that you can revisit again with a partner, a small group, to kind of meet together, meeting of the minds, and dissect those questions. But that can also be something for a whole class discussion. That can be something where your teacher can kind of help you dissect, like, I'm reading this part, I see you put a question mark here, student, friend. What is it that I can, offer? What support can I offer for you? Can I re-explain that? Oh, it looks like everyone has a question mark, sticky note in the same place. That's obviously something that we can address as a whole class. The next thing, after they've identified their questions, would be an exclamation point. So we're going to have the students put an exclamation point next to parts that they think are interesting, parts that they think are intriguing, parts that they think are particularly exciting. So then again, when we have that discussion, whether it be partner, small group, whole class, we can really ask, like, what parts of this story were really exciting or really interesting to you or jumped out to you? And the students can easily identify those. So now they've addressed their questions, or they've at least started thinking about, what do I want to know more about? And now what am I interested in? What do I really like to read? And you can even give your small group or your partner or your whole class very specific prompts. What was the most exciting? I see you put 5 exclamation points in this book. Which one of those is the most exciting and why? Or which one of those would be like the most exciting events to make a movie about? Or, something like kind of get them talking about media. It's always really fun. And then you can have them, maybe for your third one, maybe do a star or an asterisk, if you will. And this is going to be a good one, and I think it's hard, and that's okay, that's good. And the text is great for this, is putting a star next to the parts of the text that you think are the most important as a student, the most salient, the big ideas. And so sometimes, of course, that's a skill we're going to be practicing in English, we're going to be practicing in our other content areas as well, but social studies is a great place where we can really support literacy. And so, having that extra practice outside of your typical, English language arts time to try to identify what makes the main idea, what makes this idea more important than maybe some of the other ideas in that paragraph that you didn't put a star next to, is a great skill. Of course, they can take that skill and apply it to other texts they read. They can take that skill and apply it to assessments that they take, right? Being able to really pull out the most important ideas is a skill that a lot of kids really need that extra time to work with, and this book is a great place for that. So just to recap, because I feel like I've been all over the place, your close reading activity can happen here with your sticky notes, questions for clarification or misunderstandings or further wonderings. putting a exclamation point next to the most interesting or exciting parts. That's the engagement piece there. And then the stars next to what are the main ideas. And again, for the main ideas, that's another great one to have your students sit in a partner, small group, whole class, and together collaboratively kind of have that conversation. Why is this fact more important than this fact? Or why did we pull these 3 facts and nothing else from that page? So that's a really good way that you can kind of use this text to practice that reading skill. Some students might put a question mark next to vocabulary they don't understand, but other students, depending on your class, again, you have to kind of amend this close reading activity for your class, but this can also be used to really highlight vocabulary in particular. And I have to say, the vocabulary here is really great. I always love when I can understand the meaning of a text that I'm reading aloud to my students, but I know there's going to be a couple words in there that maybe my students have heard before, but they couldn't tell me the definition. They would have a hard time explaining it. So another thing you could do is have them take a Post-it and either with a W for word or a V for vocabulary, kind of note with their Post-it notes what words they're not understanding. And then whatever types of vocabulary activities you would normally do, whether that's like a chart that has like word, part of speech, definition, illustration, or whether you're using your words in sentences, or whether you have an activity where you use context clues to figure out the meaning of a word, or whether you possibly do like the Freyer model, this would be a great place to then pull out those vocabulary words that you've identified with your Post-it notes. So I feel like I'm getting like so detailed here about the close reading, but the way the text is written, it is rigorous, and not rigorous in a way that's intimidating, but rigorous in a way that there's a lot there to work with. And keep in mind when you're having them annotate with the little Post-it notes, you can give them whatever focus you need to give them. Okay, put a T next to all the topic sentences. Put a little quotation marks where you see dialogue. So you can really expand this close reading activity to focus on the reading skills that your students really need to work on. Another reading activity that we can use is like a Venn diagram. So it's where we have the two interloping circles here. And again, keep in mind, you can use a Venn diagram in a number of ways, but one way you might use the Venn diagram with this book is one side of the Venn diagram, we're listing traits of John Adams. The other side of the diagram, we're listing traits of Abigail Adams. And then have the students try to decide, because we are focusing on kind of this like dual biography, this supportive, equal partnership. What do they share? What things do they have in common, right? That make them such a powerful partnership? What can we identify in the center of our Venn diagram? I really think that, students are used to working with Venn diagrams and taking notes. It feels very worksheety to a lot of kids, but here it's about people, and it makes them, or maybe you could even, which I'm getting ahead of myself, but kids like to talk about themselves. Maybe your Venn diagram has John Adams on one side and the student on the other side. What are words that describe me? What are words that describe John Adams? And what do we have in common? What do I have in common with this influential figure? And then if you really want to take it to the next level, I know a lot of people are really focusing on making sure that students can back up what they say with evidence. So if we're going back to our original Venn diagram where we have Abigail Adams on one side and John Adams on the other side, you could have on the back of that paper or on a separate sheet of paper, have the students find evidence in the book to prove that what they're saying is correct. So if we say something like, John Adams is ambitious. Okay, great. Where in the book did you find that? So you can have the student pull out that quote and the page number on which they found it, so they kind of get that practice. Okay, I've made some claims about the text. Now what evidence can I find to support my claim? So not only are we supporting claims with evidence, but that brings in lessons about using quotation marks. That brings in lessons about how to adequately cite your sources. So there's really a lot that we can do with that. So that's like the Venn diagram idea, even extrapolated further into kind of an supporting your claims with evidence, or text-based claims, or whatever verbiage you're using to describe that. So really, as I'm even telling you these things, I'm like, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. There's really a lot of opportunities here to take those literacy skills that students might be practicing in their English language arts part of the day or in their English language arts class, and bringing it into social studies, or using social studies to focus on those key literacy skills. And Abigail and John is a really great, rigorous text to help you do that in your classroom. So for using this book in a social studies specific setting, classroom, lesson time, whatever that might be, there's actually a lot of really great stuff you could do with this book. So of course, the book provides the context, the story for the students, but in history, using primary sources where you can really helps the students. Obviously, that is also, in addition to this book, rigorous reading, but it really does give an eyewitness account from someone who's there. So a really great activity would be, after reading this book, or I suppose you could do it beforehand. It's kind of your discretion as the teacher. But after reading this book, finding some of John and Abigail's letters to each other. And there are places online where you can find it for free. So you can find it at, the National Archives site. Whitehouse.org has copies of their letters, and also the Massachusetts Historical Society. Now, depending on your grade level, you may not print the entire letter and give it to your student. Maybe it's something you project and you read aloud to them. Maybe you select an excerpt that they're going to read. And with primary sources, I think the National Archives also has great kind of sheets that you can download for free about how to analyze a primary source. What exactly are we looking for when we look at this document? But that's a really powerful skill for them. So it's kind of like this supplemental social studies piece. We have kind of read the story of this couple in the book, and now let's actually dig into the letters. They mention the letters in the book. We understand that letters are being written, and that's how we know so much about them. But guess what? Even though it's happened a long time ago, we still have the letters, and let's take a look at what that sounds like. And you might even kind of take those primary sources and you can use that as a jumping off point. Okay, now you pretend like you're Abigail Adams and you're responding to this letter. You've read the primary source. Now, based on what you know about Abigail Adams, what would she likely say back to her husband? Or vice versa, now that you've read this letter from Abigail Adams, and you've read about John Adams and you know about him, how might he have responded? So it kind of allows for a writing piece there and a little bit of creativity and a little bit of imagination. Of course, history-based imagination. So that's one idea. Another might be to have the students create a historical timeline of the events. It could be a timeline that just talks about the events in the Revolution, what's happening first, second, third. It could be a timeline of their lives. You could have the timeline where we record John's specific events on the top, Abigail's specific events on the bottom, and maybe in the center, like it's a big timeline, like ways where both of them appear on the timeline together. You could have the events color-coded, John, Abigail, both. But it's really great for kind of teaching that historical perspective. Like, okay, this happened, and by the time we get to this event, there are 50 years in between. How long is 50 years actually? Kind of bringing your students' age into it, bringing your parents' age into, okay, what was happening 50 years ago in this country? How different things are, and that's the amount of time we're covering here. So I think those conversations about time are important, because I think sometimes the students can start to think of all historical events as all happening in the past. It's this one specific time, but really kind of chunking it out by years. First, second, third is really great for their understanding. And also putting things in chronological order. I think from a teacher's perspective, we think like chronological order, no problem, got it, first, second, third. But a lot of times the kids need that explicit practice to kind of understand that concept. So a historical timeline would be great for this. You could kind of adapt it how you want, but there's enough in here to really make quite a detailed timeline. Another one that might be fun would be kind of because this is a dual biography and because it does focus on their relationship and their partnership together over the years, it might be fun to challenge the student to find another kind of like modern day influential, powerful couple that they could compare and contrast with John and Abigail Adams. And that could look like a Venn diagram, but it doesn't have to. You could have them chart it in a T-chart. It could just be anecdotal. But I think that might be kind of fun. And that might be a fun group project where then the students share out with the rest of the class. Not a huge project, something small, but it might be fun to kind of hear like, wow, these 4 people thought of, you know, Barack and Michelle Obama. These 4 people thought of Jay-Z and Beyonce. No, I don't know. Depends on the age level of your students. But it's kind of fun to like let them open up history in that way and make those connections between past and present. Another activity might be, even if you're willing and you have the resources, to have the students record a podcast where they're, you know, pretending like they're telling the story of John and Abigail, and they can use the quotes. There's, again, another great opportunity for writing in there. Students have to kind of write the script for their podcast before they record it. Or another way you could even do that is have the students create or stage like a talk show in the classroom. So you could have someone obviously being the interviewer, and you could have John and Abigail Adams sitting right there. And you can add characters. You can have George Washington sitting there. You can have Benjamin Franklin sitting there, and have the students really like act that out for the class. And again, that can be impromptu. The students can bring the book with them up to the front to kind of like remind themselves, right? Or if you want to really incorporate that writing and that planning piece, you can have the groups kind of write out their scripts for their talk show before they go up to the front. So I do think there is some opportunity. Of course, now we're kind of getting into like the writing and the kind of theatrical part of it, but it does kind of also bring in that sort of simulation piece, right? We're pretending like we are these people and kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of historical figures, which is really powerful and it's fun. I think sometimes we get so bogged down in I have to teach this content in this way and I have to meet this standard that we forget that even just having that experience of acting out a fake talk show, the students are learning so many skills. They're so engaged, and that's what they're going to remember when they go home at night and their parents ask them, what did you do today? They're going to be like, oh my gosh, I was in front of my whole class. I was pretending to be John Adams. And yes, it's a great activity to stage a fake historical talk show, but this book is a great resource for that because there's so much to work with here. Not only do you get a sense of them as individuals, you get a sense of them together, you get the historical information, like the events that are happening. I mentioned like the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, that they're involved in. There is enough that you could really fill a talk show. Both the interviewer and the interviewees would have enough to say, like, this book can help populate those responses. So it is a really solid resource for doing some fun social studies activities in the class because it is such a detailed, like, high-level text. Okay, so the next activities that we're going to talk about are art activities. And the artwork in this book is so unique. It really lends itself well to either discussions of art, analyzing art. Also, it's like another way that you can look at social studies content is through artwork. I think that's a really important lesson for us to teach. So there's 4 different art activities that I would like to share with you. The first activity requires the students to look through the book and choose their favorite piece of art. So I've chosen this one for an example. Okay, so then you would have your students really take a close look at the artwork, spend the time to really get familiar with it, and then answer some questions. So just like the other activities we've talked about today, these questions can be things that our whole class. They can be written response, they can be pair share, they can be small group. Kind of depends on what works best for your class. So they might answer questions like, what's happening in this work of art? And I would really encourage them to be specific and add as much detail as they can. I think when students get to the point where they say, oh, I can't think of anything else, and you just push them a little bit further, you kind of help them discover that thing that was right in front of them the whole time that they may not have noticed. The other question you might ask them, and we're talking about analyzing art here, is just what emotions do you feel when you look at this piece of art? What does it remind you of? What does it bring up for you on an emotional level? And then finally, I like this one because this is like a text to self, a text to world connection. When you look at this piece of art, does it remind you of anything in your own life? And if you are a parent or an educator, what a wide range of responses you get when you ask students to think about their own lives. So anyway, that's just one way we can kind of start picking apart a piece of art, analyzing a piece of art. And it's really great because it can either be facilitating some of the work you've already done, or it can be kind of your entry lesson into analyzing art, and you can reference this lesson again when you look at other artwork in the future. The second art activity that you could try is a little bit more tactile. It's actually sculpting a bust out of clay of either John Adams or Abigail Adams. Or if you want to get crazy, I guess the bust could be two busts that are connected in some way, right? Dual biography, dual bust. And then to accompany that bust, there might be a description of that person, of their achievements. And then when the project is over, you can kind of set up around the classroom, maybe a shared space, a library, computer lab, all of the busts with the descriptions laid in front of them. And it can be, or maybe in the front office, and that can be a display. People can come in and look and know, oh, okay, this is what these children are learning about, and they've kind of picked up their inspiration from the artwork and the text in this book. Or what I always like to do if I do any kind of like gallery walk or museum type display of work is to invite students in other grades to come and look, especially students who are in the grade right below mine, kind of as a preview for like the kind of content and activities they can expect in the next grade level. So that's the second art activity, would be to sculpt a bust and an accompanying description of our historical figures. The third art activity would be to create a postage stamp that honors either John Adams or Abigail Adams, or as I mentioned before, perhaps maybe the two of them. So that is a fun way for students to get creative and really think about, how can I express the influence that these two people had on our nation's history in such a small image? And I think sometimes when we're pushed to reduce our thoughts or our space is so limited, that's where the big ideas really tend to shine and stand out. And if you're having students that are uncomfortable with this, they feel overwhelmed because they don't participate in this kind of stuff very often, you can always maybe pair them up. Sometimes it's a little less scary to have a buddy, depending on your age level as well. And you can make the stamp any size you want. It can be a real stamp, or you can make a bigger size stamp that you can have the students then present to their classmates. Why did they choose the colors and images and facial expressions that they did for their postage stamp? And that might be fun to kind of bring in. I know stamps they feel like old world, but it might be a fun thing to bring in for the students. What do stamps typically look like? What do stamps that honor historical figures look like? Go to the post office. I always put things that I show my students in sheet protectors so I know they're going to survive the lesson, and have them kind of get that inspiration before you start. And then our fourth art activity would be to have your students design a historical monument dedicated to John Adams, Abigail Adams, or like I mentioned before, both of them together. And so this idea of historical monument is so great because it brings up the discussion of what is a historical monument, and it gives you the opportunity to research and talk about as a class other historical monuments, right? Like we could be talking about, the Martin Luther King Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. Like, how do they look different? How do they look the same? What makes a good historical monument? And then invite the students to create their own based on what they've read and also what they've seen in the book. This would be a great place, like a jumping off point for inspiration for their memorial. And so you can take this project as far as you want. So for their, for their historical monument, you might just have them do the planning piece. How big is it going to be? Where's the location where your monument is going to be positioned? What materials will you use, right? How are you going to allow people to come in and see it? There's just so many things to think about, and you can even just have them draw the memorial if you want, like a model of what it might look, not a model, a drawing, a sketch of what it might look like. And then the next step, if you want to take it there, would be to actually create a small model of what your historical monument would look like. And then we can take all those research questions from the sketch and apply them. Okay, well, again, now that we're making a small model, what materials would be suitable for a small model? And the great thing with projects like that is that you as the teacher can kind of decide the scope of the project. Do they do it at home? Do they do it at school? Do they do it half and half? In what ways can you support them? Do you give them some materials to choose from? Is it a totally open book? But either way, it's just a great way to allow them to be creative, but also keep them kind of in that history, social studies state of mind. So those are 4 art activities. I'm showing you 8, so sorry. Those are 4 art activities that you can use the book Abigail and John to kind of help inform in your classroom. Finally, we're going to talk about how you can use the book Abigail and John in STEM activities. So I know that's a buzzword that we've been hearing a lot in education lately. When we say STEM, we're basically talking about real-world application of what you're learning in the classroom. There's a real focus on problem solving, right? Like, here's a problem we need to solve. Now, let's think of some different creative solutions. And it's really great to try and teach STEM where you can, because it helps students really develop these critical thinking skills that are going to prepare them for college and career and life thereafter. And so, well, life after college, I should say. And they are skills that really have to be practiced. I think sometimes we assume that you either have critical thinking skills or you don't have critical thinking skills, but we can help students develop that skill. And I know it seems odd, people hear STEM and they think, oh, tech. But really, you can be doing STEM in all content areas, including history. What you're really asking students to do when you say that you're doing a STEM activity is really kind of take a look at the past, present, future, especially in history, through an inquiry lens. How do we ask questions? How do we maybe think about what would be an interesting problem that's here and kind of try and solve it? So history really lends itself well to this kind of critical thinking because, if we're imagining something about the past, or I don't know about you all, but my students love what if questions. What if it was like this? And what if it was like that? And what if that was happening today? And, STEM activities, are a really great way to kind of think some of those things through. Okay, based on what we know about society then and society now, let's explore that what if. Keeping it based in reality, of course. So these STEM activities will be, I think, a good way to practice that. So there are 3 different STEM activities that I want to share with you today that you can use this book for. So once the students have read this book, you can do the STEM activity called Without Wi-Fi. So I know for us, it's really hard to imagine what the world would be like without Wi-Fi. Even, myself, it's difficult. A lot of my parents of my students are saying, how do I get my kid off their phone? Oh my gosh, they're so addicted. And I think to myself, I'm addicted, right? It's not just a teen or kid problem. It's an all of us issue these days. So asking them to think about that really brings something that's a part of their life multiple times a day, and connecting that with history. So let's just imagine for a moment that Abigail and John Adams are suddenly given Wi-Fi. They've never had it before, obviously, and now they suddenly have it. So now we have smartphones. Now we have the internet. Now we have social media. And imagine how their lives might be different with the introduction of Wi-Fi. I really like these kind of activities because it feels so familiar to the kids. So okay, let's say what if they do have Wi-Fi? Okay, John Adams has an Instagram page. What pictures are on his Instagram page? What is John Adams Instagramming? Let's keep it based in fact, right? And this book is a great reference point. And even creating some of these like fake social media sites, or online profiles is really a great way to get kids back in the book and rereading, right? Oh, yeah, what did he do? What was he participating in? What would have been important enough in his life to post about it online? And same for Abigail Adams. And so you can kind of take that any direction you choose. Is this something that they're going to post on their main Instagram feed that's going to be there forever? Is it going to be in their Instagram stories and it's going to be gone for 24 hours? Is it going to be an email they're sending to each other? Are they FaceTiming people? And so you can really kind of allow students to get creative with that. And then you can choose maybe the format you would like for your students to present to each other. Do you want them to have it just be paper and marker or what have you and have it present that way? Do you want it to be in a Prezi or a PowerPoint, right? Like what way will your student present what they've created to the rest of the class? And just like our other activities, this one can also be individual, small group, partner work, depending on like what your specific class needs. So Without Wi-Fi really asks them to think about history and context of modern day. So it's fun, it's relevant, and it really kind of pushes their critical thinking. The second activity is called Super Spy. And I'm been reading this activity and I'm looking at it and I think to myself, my goodness, my students would eat this up. So essentially you want to remind students that like invisible ink, ciphers, hidden letters, like these are all ways that Revolutionary War spies use to kind of communicate messages or like transfer top secret information during the war. Remember that the book does cover John Adams's and Abigail Adams's involvement in the Revolutionary War. So now you're going to ask your students to engineer their own device that will kind of allow them to transmit information without alerting British soldiers or British generals that there's any communicating going on whatsoever. And again, we want to keep it based in fact. So how could they engineer this device or this tool or this mechanism using only the materials that are available in the 1770s? What would that look like? So if you really think about it, this question is a critical thinking question because it's asking the students to really think it all the way through. Okay, what things do we need to know to even answer this question? What materials are available in 1780s? How do people transport information in general in the 1780s? Okay, then that's backward plan from that. Based on what we know about the 1770s, 1780s, what could we possibly create? And it also, I think, gives students a great insight into this inquiry process that we do all our research and we have this idea and then we create this idea and, it might not work. And that's okay. So then, okay, here's the idea we have. It's not totally effective. How can we tweak it and change it and shift it to make it what we really do want? And then we kind of go through the cycle again. And when we present our final device that we've engineered for spying at the end, we might also acknowledge to the class or to our group, it's not a perfect device. These might be the flaws with it. Like it really allows students to kind of be a part of that inquiry cycle. So Super Spy would be the name of that activity. So we have Without Wi-Fi, we have Super Spy, and then the third STEM activity I have that you can use with Abigail and John is called The Cost of War. And thinking about the cost of war, and I'll tell you the activity in a minute, but as a teacher, you might need to decide how much scaffolding you need to provide to your students for them to engage in this activity. Based on your student's ability, based on the grade level that they're in, based on their interest, this might be one where you might want to fill in some holes to make sure that students are invested and don't feel too overwhelmed. So I'd like to read to you from one of Abigail Adams' letters where she wrote about how the food prices were rising during the war. So she says, in short, 100 pound 2 years ago would purchase more than 2 will now. So that would be something that could be a primary source you could kind of show the students, right? You've read the book, you look at your primary source, and now we're kind of going into that critical thinking STEM piece. So this would be, and you can do this as a class or you can do this with the parents. you would ask the students to create a general budget for their lives right now. How much do you spend on food? How much do you spend on shelter? How much do you spend on clothes? And you can have the students go off and do that research with their families, or if you feel like you want to provide those like fake numbers for them, you can. And then you want to challenge yourself to take that budget that you have created that is like just a normal week to week living, and how can you cut it in half? What things would you be willing to give up or change or have less of, or maybe swap out the type of item that you're purchasing in order to survive on only half? So we're almost like trying to do sort of like this simulation. If we were in a similar situation as Abigail Adams, what might we do in our modern day lives to make that feasible? So questions you might ask your students: how are you going to save money? Can you grow your own food? People might have the space and the ability to do that. Can you exchange goods with your neighbors and friends so that you don't have to go out and buy them? And really encourage the students to like look around the classroom. What people in here would, do you think you have something to offer them, or they have something to offer you? Maybe if some person in the classroom has the ability to grow the food, okay, well then that might be the person that you trade another good with. And then you can have the students kind of develop this plan, this half budget. You can have them do it in a spreadsheet. You can have them, do it on paper. You can even take the project to the next step and have the student, once they've created their halved budget, kind of reach out to other students in the class and decide, okay, like I'm going to get my farmed food from here. This person in my classroom knows how to sew. I'm going to, get my clothing from here. And so even just like thinking all the way around that problem would be very, I don't want to say challenging because that has a negative connotation, but it requires you to think about how to solve this problem very deeply. It's not a question you can answer as a yes, no. It's not a question that you can immediately answer by picking up the book. Now we're taking this kind of historical reality and we're applying it to our own lives. And what would that actually look like, and actually going through and making those cuts. So I think it's a great way for students to imagine history, because a lot of times I think students say, okay, things were expensive. And that might be where they stop. And they take their notes and they take their tests, and that might be the end of it. But having to imagine what half would actually look like in their own lives, okay, well, you might have to cut your phone service. You might have to sell your PS4, right? That's what's kind of going to make kids have that shock. Not my PS4. Oh, I can't get rid of my cell phone, right? It's going to make it more real and make that history feel so much more like an experience they would have in their own lives. So those are 3 different STEM activities that you can use in the classroom. And remember, it's about inquiry, asking students to ask the difficult questions. It's about posing a challenging problem to the student and allowing them to be creative in the different ways that they might respond to that problem. Critical thinking really is at the centerpiece of your STEM activities. And so that's kind of what you want to foster and develop. If your students are not used to doing any critical thinking whatsoever, like I said before, you may want to consider, how can I scaffold this activity so that it's challenging enough that my students can't get the answer right away, but not so challenging that they completely check out. And so maybe you do all 3 activities, and one is very scaffolded. In the next activity, you pull back those scaffolds a little bit. In the next activity, you pull back those scaffolds a little bit more to kind of help increase their stamina and their skill. And how wonderful to have a book like this that really allows you, I think a lot of people might look at the book and be like, oh, that's nice, the story about Abigail and John. But really what it's providing you is this like high quality text that really makes history feel real and really allows you to bring in other subject matter into your history classroom and create these really beautiful cross-curricular activities. So at this point, I just want to mention how important assessments can be in the classroom, not only for informing you as the teacher or the parent as to where your students are, but also help the students understand where they are and what they need to know. So I just want to remind you, there are a variety of assessments that you can download for free at the GratefulAmericanBookSeries.com website. They have short answer assessment questions, multiple choice assessment questions. They even have some fun kind of word working you can do type assessments like crossword puzzles. So there are a variety of assessments, a variety of ways that you can assess what the children are learning after reading a book like this, and they can all be found online for free. So again, the website is www.gratefulamericannbookseries.com, and I really encourage you to go and check out those assessments. There's really no reason for you to recreate the wheel, so definitely take advantage of those free resources. Okay, that's all for me today. I'm so excited to see what activities you do with your classes using Abigail and John. Remember that all of the lessons that are mentioned today, all of the activities that are mentioned today, are PDFs that are downloadable for free for you. Just go to the Grateful American Book Series website, and they're all there for you to use in your classroom. So thank you to all of you, parents and teachers alike, for just bringing your passion for history to your students, for being so dedicated, for being so loyal, for being so hardworking. What you do is important. You are important. Thank you guys so much.